pivotal period of 33 making a decision to leave theater, there's an inertia that happens once you get into your late 30s and early 40s, and now you're in this career, and now you're like, well, do I go back to school for 4 years? Do I upend my life? Now you maybe have kids and a spouse and all those things where you go, well, now like the risks are higher if I go like, what if I hate this? All it takes is a Ford to be in charge of the federal government and cut the guts out of the Canada Council. All of my friends will be unemployed. I don't know what they would do. That kind of uncertainty hangs over the heads of artists. Now, 10 years in, this is probably not true, but for the first 5 years of my career, I felt palpably that theater was more stressful than paramedicine. Financial stress, the constant judging that you get from your peers, and the need to like perform all the time, and the stress of living a freelance life.
This is the Personal Finance Show.
Hi, I'm Bo Humphreys, and this is the Personal Finance Show. Michael Kruse wants you to not be afraid of changing your career. We usually go to school for one thing, one field of study, one industry. Then we work hard to find jobs and build experience in that industry. We become experts. After 10 or 15 years, we become well known for doing one thing very well. Maybe you've been in the same job or industry for that long and you're totally fine. You're paid well, you enjoy the work, there's no reason to move on. After 10 years working as a lighting designer in the world of Canadian theatre, Michael Kruse wasn't fine. Among other issues, he couldn't see himself ever reaching a comfortable retirement or financial independence, making the money he was making. So in his early 30s, Michael left his long career in the theatre and decided he was going to pursue something completely different. He was going to become a paramedic. Michael joined me in the studio in Hamilton to share his personal finance story.
Money as an object, I think, is the earliest memory.
Okay.
Fascinating as a kid. They're like different sizes, shapes, coins. Coinage is really fascinating when you're a kid.
Yeah.
Remember choking on a penny? That's probably the earliest thing.
Okay, so the earliest...
When I was
That's
in
no
kindergarten,
good.
I almost vomited because I choked on, I was chewing on a penny or something when I was in kindergarten. But no, the fascination with like the actual physical design of money, I think, is interesting.
Well, because they make it like it's a piece of art, right?
Absolutely. And
I don't know if there's intent there.
Oh, there's got to be. I think there's probably a whole design philosophy around how money is like the actual paper money and coinage. I don't know much about the history of coinage, but like that kind of ego of stamping a coin in your, in the leader's image and things like that. The different colors, the different textures. I love the history of money. Have you done an episode on the history of money?
I have not, but I did take the history of business in university.
Right.
From 1200 to 1550 was the first like semester, and then it went into modern business, like 7-Elevens and stuff like that, from Japan to America, and how America ruined the 7-Eleven, right? Because they put slushies and hot dogs in there.
Yes.
And if you go to a 7-Eleven in Japan, it's not like that at all.
Oh, really?
You could get like
fascinating.
one time you could get Windows 95 at 7-Eleven. Like that's how you get anything there, right? But yeah, the history of business and money is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So we probably just carried it on, like, because who needs to see the Queen on the back of our money?
Well, now it's so rare. I remember when we got rid of the $2 bill, and everyone was sort of hoarding them because this was an object that was so Canadian, being next to our American partners who don't have a $2 bill.
Yeah, I
remember people keeping them in their wallets and carrying them around, and this is like red. The fact that Canadian money is like different colors, especially in comparison to the US.
It was odd.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like, for example, for the past 3 months, I've had 2 $20 bills in my wallet, and I've never spent them because everything is now digital transactions.
Right. It's backup money.
It's backup. I don't even know why I still have it.
Well, there's always a room for cash somewhere. Like, there's always a place, like the farmer's market, for example.
Yes, exactly.
And, we have one we can just walk to.
Yeah.
So, when it comes to this physical money thing, I've asked people, like, is it important to still teach our kids about money in this way? Because are they going to even have it?
I'm a bit of a catastrophist, like secretly, a secret catastrophist, a secret prepper. I feel like in 20 years, there's a moderately reasonable chance of us living like Mad Max.
Okay, so like you have a bunker?
Yeah, so I don't have a bunker, but there will be a bunker.
You
in
support
the future.
the idea of bunkers.
I totally get being
Okay.
a bunkerist.
Okay, yes.
I don't know how realistic that will be in the future, but I feel like as the years go on, I think the utility of a bunker seems pretty reasonable. Like I can understand someone wanting a bunker.
So how does this apply to the supply of money?
Because money is this kind of, it's a philosophical object. It has meaning that is just contractual.
It's a store of value, right, assigned, right?
Yeah.
Instead of me trading a chicken for a cow, I trade you
Exactly.
a chicken for some coins or a gold bar or whatever, and then you trade that for a cow. So yeah, how does that apply then in the future when there's going to be no...
Well, one of the reasons I went into medicine, that's a bit strong to say it, but in the back of my head, I'm like, what profession in the future will always be needed?
Yeah.
And you think healing, medicine...
As long as
and
human
that kind of
beings are
knowledge,
around.
That sort of font of knowledge or approach to medicine is going to be useful no matter what milieu you're in and what cultural context you're in.
Interesting.
And if everything falls apart, and this is not an insignificant part of my thinking, and it's a bit conspiratorial, but like in the back of your head, you're like, if this falls apart, I'm going to have a barterable skill that I can actually bring that doesn't require technology to support it necessarily. It's just knowledge based kind of career that you could go into the future.
What's funny is I would say that about accounting and personal finance.
Yeah.
However, if the economy is no longer, but I guess in that case, I would still be able to help people account for how many things are worth so many things, and to record transactions between people, which would still be a thing.
Which are one of the oldest forms of writing,
oldest things,
right?
Yeah,
like
that's
absolutely,
right.
like whatever cuneiform B is all like. I sent 17 bushels of wheat to Persia, and they brought back this much oil, and we have to make.
Okay, so I feel better now that you say that. I'll be protected too.
Yeah,
Anybody who can organize numbers and things and is good at trade and understands transactions and stuff. Okay, so we're protected.
I think we're good.
All right. Okay, so I don't know how you got this penny in your mouth, but you choked on the penny
because copper tastes good. It's like this weird taste.
It does have a weird taste,
right? Yeah. Or now it's not.
So you picked it up. Do you remember about how old you would have been? Like what?
I would have been
range?
probably 6 or 5.
6 or 5. Okay,
Yeah,
so you're choking on a penny, but throughout you're fascinated with the look of money in the field. Did you want to collect coins? Do you remember that?
Yeah, my father collected coins when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And I was also fascinated by his collection and the dates and the history that's attached to money. I never was really serious about it. I collected stamps when I was a kid, but not in any serious way.
No, you're not going to like build it up and then sell it.
No, it was never an investment.
No,
it was just like a physical object, interest in the physical object.
Yeah, okay.
And certainly we had collections of a collection of coins from other places.
Yeah.
Probably British pounds.
What's a good way to learn about the world?
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't it?
Yeah, because
this whole
these are cultural objects, right? And it tells a story about that community. I don't know if I had an overt understanding of that when I was a kid, but it certainly was part of that fascination.
Do you think this affected the way that you then treated money as you started to earn it? Do you remember the first time you earned any kind of money?
I was thinking about this today. My early, so I grew up in this working class household, and a very kind of, I think, a very stable, childhood. We were middle class, lived in a suburban house, so there wasn't a lot of money pressures when I was a kid.
You always had the basics covered, everything was covered.
We had a pool,
nice. So,
both parents had a good working class union jobs that were like.
What did they do, if you don't mind?
My mother was a bus driver.
Okay, yeah.
And she drove for school bus and then for city transit, so she had a good city job. And then my dad worked in B.F. Goodrich in Kitchener, which was a tire factory building tires.
Making tires.
So he was part of the CAW and or the United Rubber Workers, whatever the union was that supported them. And so we had there was a strike at some point in my childhood that was very brief, but pretty solid economic stability when I was a kid.
Usually pensions in this case?
Pensions and benefits like dental care and glasses and all that stuff. So it was a good life.
But
right?
hard work for them.
Hard work for them. Back in a time when it paid off, though, right? When you can actually afford the house in the suburbs and, amenities like a pool, which is seems like it was a bougie thing these days, especially with
even have room for a pool would be so odd, right?
And growing up in Kitchener, we had a large lot, and it was on the outskirts, and so it was a good life. And so we didn't really have there wasn't sort of constant kind of hunger or need.
So you didn't. You weren't pushed to. You got to get a job to get this.
No,
yeah.
I really wasn't. The push to get to work was sort of like for whatever aspirations you have. So I think that my earliest stuff was like umpiring, equipment management, and like an arena, things like that were kind of not really high paying. They're all minimum wage,
and not consistent.
But a little bit of pocket change. And then I got my first job was working as a line cook. No, it was actually a dishwasher in a restaurant in Kitchener. And then I became a line cook after that. And that was when I was making sort of more consistent money.
Like you get a paycheck every couple
I get a
of
paycheck
weeks.
Do
you remember what you're doing with this money?
I think I just used it as spending money. Like I wasn't saving it.
Yeah.
I was
no savings.
No
You're
savings.
not thinking about that yet.
No.
Nobody's saying like
put it in a GIC, do a T-bill, whatever it was, like do some bonds, buy bonds. None of that. I was just buying things, frivolous objects. I bought a keyboard because I was interested in music at that point, and that was my first like.
You saved up for that.
I didn't save up for it. It was more of a credit thing.
Oh, okay.
So then I owed like money over a period of time.
So yeah, so you bought it because you wanted it.
Yeah.
And it was a payment plan.
Exactly.
Like the store or whatever would have given you the
I think
option?
it was store. Yeah, I think it was store credit. I forget who it was in Kitchener, but it was some sort of store plan.
Okay, that's interesting. Then you were able to get that probably with your parents, maybe.
There must have been
something
there. There must have been. I don't remember.
But I guess it's sort of like saving for it, in that you had to make regular payments, and if you missed a payment, what would happen to the keyboard?
Yeah, then there'd be an issue. Yeah, exactly.
Away.
Yeah, it goes away. Yeah, exactly.
And you probably knew that.
Yeah, I was. There was a certain amount of responsibility that, like, this is your debt. You have to take care of it. You have to. So there was
an early loan.
Thing. Yeah,
and you probably paid it off.
Oh yeah, it was fine.
However long it took.
But then I got a job. I got a job early on as a stagehand.
Okay, yeah.
Right. So Kitchener has a big venue called the Centre in the Square down in Ontario, and it's a major touring venue for all the big acts that would. It's like a 2,000-seat theater, so operas and musicals and all. And I had a real interest in theater, and so I got a job as a stagehand.
So IATSE?
IATSE.
Wow. So you're working for the stagehand union.
I was 15 when I started.
Wow.
Making like serious coin on a gig, right?
Even to start, even though you wouldn't have first crack at the hours or the gigs.
Yeah, I was a permittee. Yeah.
It's the seniority whole thing with the unions, right?
But we would do like my first gig was the Rolling Stones Steel Wheels tour.
Really?
In '89, I did the Out in Toronto. So I had worked with. I was doing some theater work in Kitchener. We heard that there was this massive need for labor in Toronto. Cats was loading out. Something with Phantom, and the Rolling Stones were loading out. They needed like 150 bodies to do that.
Sure. Is this Skydome?
This was at the exhibition place
at
first.
Okay.
Skydome later for the second leg, but the first leg was on Labor Day, like in 1989, Labor Day.
Okay.
So triple time until midnight, overnight call, so it was double time after midnight. Like it was a serious amount of coin.
We can just talk about union minimums a little bit. Yeah. So like you would have you always get a minimum call, like right?
Minimum 4-hour call.
4 hours, maybe 5 hours depending on what it is.
Yeah.
And then after a certain time you get paid more money.
Yeah.
And after a certain amount of hours, usually 12 or so, you get also paid more money.
Yeah, exactly.
So and then you said holiday.
And it was a Sunday, and it was into Labor Day Monday.
So all this to say is you were getting some mad money at 15.
Oh, my God. I made $700 for that one call at the exhibition. I was like, $700, 15 years old. $700. This is in 1989. There's no way I'm going back to work next week. Like, see you later.
Or
my
back to
$6.
high school.
I stayed in high school, obviously, but I certainly booked off days. Like I would sign like, hey Ma, I need a note because I'm going to go do the opera down at the thing to do a day there, and I would do like 2 or 3 of those calls a month.
You don't need high school diploma to get a job at IA,
God,
or not then anyway. I don't know what.
It's an apprenticeship program.
It's apprenticeship, okay,
right?
Yeah.
So like I could have, and I'm sure I know people who either. I think most people finished high school because it wasn't a constant gig. Like you couldn't make enough money full time as a permittee when you're 16.
You're not making $700 a day every day.
No.
No, that was a one-off.
Yeah,
and then you might have some cheaper days, but maybe half of that.
Sure, or
but
a third,
or a third. Yeah, exactly. But not consistent.
Not consistent.
Whenever there's got to be an event.
It's got to be an event, and there's got to be enough people they need that they have to hire from the permit list, which is not the member list.
Yes.
Right? Because I was a permittee, so I would pay them for the pleasure of working on the day. It was like 6 or 7%.
And this happens in a lot of unions. There's seniority, and there's a whole lot of different ways to get. And once you're in, you're good, you're golden.
Yeah.
So then what did you do with this money?
Buying stuff, going out with my friends. Now I had money actually, and I didn't have to work. The key was I was probably not making, except for those rare things like that or the auto show or something.
Yeah.
I wasn't making more money than my friends, but I would only work a few times a month.
Yeah.
I didn't have a part-time job where I was doing 15 hours a week.
Good point.
Or 20 hours a week.
So you had more time to yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just time to be a teenager.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so let's fast forward then. End of your teens, you're going to school. You decide you want to go to school somewhere?
Yeah, it was theater school. So it was Ryerson Theater School at Ryerson
Did
University.
IATSE affect the choice of theater school?
Or
did
no.
Did your interest in theater affect you
It was
joining
my
the
interest
union?
in theater.
Of course,
Yeah. It was my interest, and I was interested in being a designer. And and IA doesn't represent designers in Canada, so this is going to be now a college, program that I was going to become a designer at Ryerson Theater School.
Ryerson has a theater school within.
Yeah, now it's called the Ryerson School of Performance, which doesn't talk about technical theater. Like performance is not necessarily technical theater or design. So then was Ryerson Theater School.
So how did you pay for that?
God, I have no idea.
Oh, really?
So this is before the big tuition hikes from Harris.
Okay.
So this is 1991 to 94. Harris had just taken over like 92 or something, right?
So Mike Harris was Premier of Ontario.
Yeah, Mike Harris. And there weren't any big university cuts at the beginning. They started to creep up though. So my tuition that was like $1,900 I think for tuition for the 2 semesters.
Okay.
And I got OSAP.
Oh, great.
And that paid for that. I had a little bit of help from my parents, but again,
for living costs,
just like food and things like that. There wasn't a lot of other. I had to pull. I don't know how I got through my first university. I think my tax that year was. I think my total income was $8,000.
Yeah, you remember that?
I remember that. I think it was like sub 10, and this included tuition and accommodations.
Yeah,
I think that OSAP paid for accommodations and tuition. I think there was enough there. Yeah,
yeah,
and then I had to fill in the rest.
Okay, you were working IA sometimes?
I did. I did the big Phantom tour that pulled in a bunch of money for a week. Probably finished it around that year. Was when I stopped, and I started doing other gigs.
Okay.
As a hand,
gotcha.
and as a designer. There was some money from my folks. It was about a couple grand probably to fill in that. So there's like $3,000 or $4,000 from OSAP. Most of it was a grant. Then there was maybe a couple grand from my folks, and then the rest of it was like just me doing random gigs. And then being exceedingly frugal.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
You're probably a really frugal liver. That's not a word.
Frugal lifestyle?
Yes. You led a frugal lifestyle.
Exactly, yeah. Because I couldn't afford anything else. I mean, that was sort of set me up for the rest of the next 10 years.
Okay, so that did influence. So you went to your sort of school of frugal hard knocks.
Yeah.
By experiencing it, because what if you needed money? Could you go back to your parents?
I could. I think I did that a couple times, but not a lot. And I wasn't really borrowing money from anybody at that time. They would sort of fill in. I think if I had an emergency, they probably would have. But I managed to sort of scrape together enough for rent and everything else. I actually got into a huge problem because I had a roommate in year 2 who left early, and I was saddled with this like $800 a month apartment. I had no roommate. And so I almost got evicted. And then a friend of mine, Brad Treneman, who's a lighting designer, I just want to say his name out loud because he saved my bacon. Because he was working at Stage West in Mississauga as a lighting board operator. And he said, hey, there's a show in, I'm leaving. I'm going to wherever to do another thing. They need someone to operate the board. I'm like, well, this is something this is part of my skill set. I know I'm in second year theater school, but I've already done a bunch of this.
You did this in high school?
I've done this in high school. I did the IA work.
So you're building up your theater skills early.
Operation. Yeah, operation. Yeah. And so I said, well, I can do that. So then I took on an 8-show-a-week gig at Stage West doing grease. And I was getting
sound
paid,
and lights or
just
lights?
lighting, just lighting.
Okay.
Yeah, just had an electrician gig. So I was running the show, and I was doing maintenance and little side gigs and stuff there. But 8 shows a week and going full time at university.
Okay.
Just sort of, and I was making maybe $400, $500 a week,
and
I managed to pay off this debt that I had from this house thing, and it carried me into the summer, and then everything was going to be okay.
So let's talk about that. And you had to go into debt to pay your rent.
I was basically I just owed my landlord money.
Okay, so you just went to
your
landlord,
arrears.
he or she allowed you to go into your arrears. Okay.
Yeah, only for a few months. It was like 3 or 4 months. I had a couple spotty roommates, but I was about 4 months behind in rent.
How was that conversation?
Oh God! Well, we didn't have a conversation.
No,
it was avoidance.
Oh, I see.
It was like, you will owe us this. Like I was just not paying my rent, and then we're going to evict you unless you pay your rent. By luck, I got this gig. I was like, hey, by the way, I've got my rent for this. Like, let me just pay off for the next month.
I was just about to say, see, everyone, if you just have a conversation with your landlord, they might understand. But no, and because
I was a teenager and didn't know, like 21 years old, and didn't know how to have a conversation with anybody.
That's how a lot of people get into things like payday loans, because they can't make their rent. They don't want to talk to their landlord, but they know they're going to get evicted on day 2 if they don't pay, and so they go get one of those, and then they're in the cycle.
Oh yeah, exactly.
But there probably wasn't even payday loans in the 90s, if I remember.
I think that they were probably around. I didn't have access to them as a student. I
not as
didn't.
easy to get to.
It was probably a
as
few
today
years.
on every street corner.
God, I don't imagine if I would have been in deep crap if that had happened when if they were around when I was.
What about credit cards? You didn't have any credit cards?
No. I had if I did have a credit card, I had a very low limit.
Yeah.
I had a student credit card, maybe with $500. I don't think I got a credit card until at least third year or the beginning of after I exited.
Sounds like you avoided. You skipped over a bunch of problems that you could have had.
Yeah, no line of credit.
Yeah.
No, I was basically just money that I was making was coming in and going out, and there was no credit involved.
Now, I wonder, is this because your parents were not debt people? Or did they ever talk to you about debt?
We never had the conversation. And through a bunch of personal things, my family was going through a lot of flux. They got a divorce when I was in early high school, so I was basically like on my own.
Yeah,
with a little bit of support from them, but I was basically independent. I left home at 18, and I was basically independent.
But that's when people discover credit cards, because of course now 18 you can get them.
Yeah, and
then people are throwing them at you at school. Maybe they weren't so much at Ryerson. I don't know. But
it was certainly there for offering, but I never really.
You kind of missed a big problem that a lot of people run into.
Yeah.
It's just especially with the rent thing.
Yeah,
that would have been an ideal time for you to do cash advances and things like that.
Totally,
but you didn't even have those tools.
No, I was so lucky. I think in retrospect, so lucky not to get into dig into that hole, and lucky that I had this opportunity to do this now full-time gig where they were paying me real money that I could pay off my debts.
Okay, so you're doing that.
Mm-hmm.
You're able to get through school
somehow,
and the Greece thing didn't last for that long.
I had
just to pay off the rent and then get back on your feet.
I had paid my tuition for the year. This was the good thing. Paid my tuition for the year, and then I had because tuition was like $2,000.
Yeah, but that could still be a lot to pull together, because it's relative to whatever money you might be making.
Yeah, I had a
and
good
you
gig.
had your rent and
well, also Sage West was like we had a restaurant. Not a restaurant. We had an employee buffet, basically. Okay. So food was fine for the summer.
Lucked out there.
Yeah, it was a good gig. It was a good gig for a student. Oh, my God, it was a
And this is
gig.
in the wheelhouse of what you want to do
and I want to do
in the future.
Yeah.
This is not exactly what you wanted to do? Or
yeah, because I want to do design specifically.
That's right.
Yeah, so I didn't want to be an operator necessarily. But that was certainly a big part of my revenue was backing up my design work with doing that kind of with doing stagehand work and doing technician, being an electrician basically, and sometimes a sound guy, to sort of back up the design work. That's how I sort of managed to pay for everything.
Yeah, okay.
And then somehow in the middle of third year, I had a reasonable apartment now that I was living in. I was living in a room in a house in the East End. So there was about 4 to 6 months of not working full time doing Stage West, maybe doing some occasional like non-union gigs around the city. But I had paid off enough of the tuition that I could live for the rest of the year and be okay.
Okay.
And then I got a job at my first actual real after school's finished, first professional gig.
Okay.
And then it was off to the races. I was freelancing.
Okay, so throughout this whole time, you're not thinking about saving money or saving for the future or building. You're surviving.
I'm surviving. This is what a lot of theater in their 20s, when people work in their 20s in theater, this is what it is. You're just, can I pay my rent? can I pay I didn't have a car payment,
Yeah.
but now, car payments and travel.
So
and things like
personal
that.
finance sort of doesn't exist as a topic to you, really.
Other than the debt load I had from OSAP, this is the
Yeah.
only kind of debt that I had was that I had
you're having to
this-
face that now.
Yeah. It was my only anxiety was about how to pay off this $2,000 loan that I
Yeah.
had from OSAP.
And
It doesn't seem like a lot of money, like in retrospect, but back then I was like,
well, you got to find some extra money.
God, like I need an extra $100 a month or $50 a month
Right?
to pay this off.
And if you do that, it's like 2 years if they're still calculating interest.
Yeah,
I forget how OSAP works. In
OSAP
that.
was high back because the loans back in the early 90s were like 10 or 12%, or maybe 13% loans. So it was
Wow.
kind of because of this is how they financed
That's
it.
terrible.
Interest rates were high back then, and yeah, I know. But back then it was the interest rates were high, and so your loan kind of went on, and I wasn't paying a large amount in months. So it was like 3 or 4 years. In
So
fact,
3 or 4 years.
I
Yeah?
didn't pay it off 94 to 97. It went into arrears near the end.
Okay,
It ended up going into arrears
because you weren't making the payments.
I wasn't making. I had sort of fallen off the payments and avoided it, and then went to collection. But it was I had paid off about like it was like $500, $400, and then that went to collection.
That's what happens, though.
Like that's exactly, and then you're kind of messed because you've got this collection thing on your record.
So you're getting calls from collections.
Yeah.
You're avoiding those.
Yeah, I'm avoiding those. Yeah, exactly.
Did you end up settling it?
I did end up settling it because then I got a job at Shaw Festival in '97.
Okay. In Niagara.
Niagara on the Lake.
On the Lake.
I was able to pay off the last little bit that I had gone to collection, so that got cleared.
Did it affect your credit rating? Do you know?
It did. I had issues over the next couple years.
Okay.
I can't remember specifically, but I know it did affect my credit rating. It certainly
Yeah.
did affect my credit rating, and it affected like my ability to get credit.
Which you needed in the future? Spoiler alert.
Actually, it did affect my ability to get credit for. I had to get a cosign for a loan to go back to school to become a paramedic.
Okay.
Because
This is a definite spoiler. This is the
Yeah.
whole different
and then everything turned
part of
around.
your life.
Yeah, exactly. So that it did affect. I had to get a cosigner to get a loan, student. What it's called? A line of credit to go back to
from
school.
a bank
Yeah.
or whatever. Because no OSAP.
No, because this was in the U.S. Because I went to school down
you
in
went
Iowa.
To school down in Iowa.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a bit of a gap to fill in here then.
Yeah.
So how much longer are you working in theater?
I did about 10 years total. It was like 20. Yeah, it was like 1994. I left Ryerson. I graduated in 97. I had to get an extra credit or whatever.
Sure.
It's like a classic Ryerson story. You go to the Ryerson for 3 years, and then you don't graduate, and you end up working as a professional artist because no one cares what you.
No one
did in
cares.
school.
No one looks at that stuff, right?
No one cares. And then I worked for about 10 years. 2004 was when I went. When I decided I should do something else. 2005, I started back in school.
Okay, so
So about 10 years.
any relevant financial stuff in that 10 years? Are you just basically coasting?
I'm coasting. No. I paid off the OSAP. Shaw was good. I was actually making pretty good, okay money.
But where was it going?
It was just paying my debts, or not debts, paying
Your life.
my life. And with no serious. I had maybe a bit of. Did I have any savings? I had a bit of an RSP, maybe.
Do you feel like you were overspending in some way? Do you think they're, in hindsight,
Not
of course, 2020, right?
Certainly, if I wasn't saving it, then like if the criteria is you have to have 10 or 15% put in savings, and I wasn't
First,
doing that.
before you spend anything.
Before you spend it, then I was not doing that. Certainly, as an artist, you're playing this tax game,
Yeah.
and you want to write off everything you can to sort of.
So you're freelance.
Yeah, so you're freelancing, right? So my yearly incomes, I would, as a lighting designer, you make a pretty good. It's a pretty good deal as on the spectrum of like income in theater, yeah. And I, $60,000 was kind of like the gross amount I was making yearly, which is a pretty good income for freelancer in theater.
Yeah.
There are people making far less, and that was all from my theater income. There was no supplemental.
Yeah.
But you're trying to like maximize that tax wise and write everything you can off, and so your net income ends up being $13,000 a year
Because you're buying things, you're spending on things you need for work.
Yeah, it's mostly just rent. Well, I'm writing off. There's a whole cultural stuff that I'm writing off as well: movies, books, lots of travel, food. If it's like you play this little game of like how now the food write offs now are a bit less than they were in the past, but you could write off half your food Yeah, I go out with Frank. Frank is my buddy who runs Theater X. That
Yeah, you
theater-
might have trouble in an audit today, but maybe it wasn't so
Yeah.
hard. But how can you write off rent? What are you renting?
I'm now renting off a proportion of my house.
Okay,
that I
so
run
the
as an office.
yeah,
right.
so home use.
Yeah,
expense.
exactly. So that's being written off.
Okay,
What else is being
because
written off?
you're doing all of your. So yeah, what
Because
kind
I'm
of stuff you're doing?
independent
Design.
doing lighting design mostly,
Okay.
and a lot of maybe some independent tech work as well. And
Would you say a good lighting designer is barely noticed? Is that what's the criteria? Like
yeah,
if you do it well,
don't get then no one notices it. Yeah, exactly.
it's like it feels underappreciated to me.
Yeah, I think design's always been underappreciated. I think that it's more appreciated now in the last 10, 15 years. Critics certainly recognize it now as a discipline that's more important, and I think that it's especially these days, it's an essential element that is the difference between going to the movies. Now, there's obviously designers in movies and television, but live theater has a very specific aesthetic. I think the people are recognizing it, so it's an essential element that differentiates theater from other forms of art.
Yeah.
So there wasn't a lot of recognition back then, but I mean, there was enough.
You're getting good work.
I'm getting good work. I'm working across the country. I'm starting to get into the cycle of all the regional theaters in Canada, and just on the cusp of being quote unquote A-list.
Sure.
Before I leave.
And
do something else.
then I keep spoiling things, but when did the podcast start? Later?
Oh, this was a much later thing. This was in the last 5 years.
The podcast you picked up later.
Yeah.
It wasn't even in your mind. Okay.
No.
So you had a lot of experience, but you
I decided that one day I want to be able to retire, or I at least want to have the option.
Okay, so this comes into your mind.
This
now.
is a monetary decision. Like
okay.
part of it is interest. Like I got pretty good at my job,
you gotta
and I'm
have
like,
some interest.
no, I think I need to do something else because I know how to do this, and I want something fresh.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the first motivator. The second motivator is, how is this ever sustainable? I was looking at people who are 10 years older than me, whose marriages had fallen apart, like literally, who were working this kind of grueling regional schedule where they'd be at home for a few months of the year, and the rest of the year was traveling. I mean, that's a glamorous thing to do in your 20s. You get to see Canada. You have a network of friends. I still have a network of friends across the country these days. But you also go, God, I don't own a house. I can't quite make a car payment.
Really? So they just didn't pay well.
No, you really can't. And I don't know how people live these days, but even then, 15, 20 years ago, the people who were buying houses are people who had either made smart money decisions, which I was not making, in their early 20s, and were saving some money, had family money. It's the unwritten kind of law in theater is that if you've got family money, you've got a bit of wiggle room to be an artist because you don't have to worry about.
Interesting.
Right? So people who were, quote, born with a silver spoon in their mouth were able to have a much more reasonable artistic career because they didn't have to worry about buying a house. They had real estate. They had been left money that could pay for the big chunks of that, and then they wouldn't have to worry about it.
So there was a lot of privilege then in the industry.
Yeah.
And you came from a healthy family,
happy, economically
totally stable, but
there's no money being passed.
Nothing
down.
to be passed. Yeah, nothing like don't worry about it. Just do your theater thing.
Yeah, and working largely independently. Like I didn't have a lot of support financially.
So you didn't see you could literally see your future in other people, and you couldn't see yourself. You're going to work till you die.
Till you die, and or worse, fall out of favor.
Oh wow!
As an artist, right? Because
because you're having to prove yourself all the time.
Yeah, and you've got your bag of
pressure.
By the time you're in your late 30s, you've got your bag of tricks. You've got the thing that you do as a designer. And if you've been lucky, you've generated a cadre of directors who want to work with you all the time. And if you're not lucky, which is a lot of people, you don't have that. And then you're like, what do I do? Do I find a house gig someplace? Do I move into a different part of theater to become administration? They have a much better, more stable income. Administrators get paid probably the best.
Really?
In theater.
Okay.
Unless you're an A-list star, unless you're an actor star. But most people aren't. Most people are working journeyman actors.
Talent, then administration.
Yeah.
And then
talent. Even then, unless you're doing more than 4 or 5 shows a year, you're not making as much. Everyone has a part-time job, waiting tables or doing events or something. The administrators have they're not getting paid they're not getting paid six figures unless you're at a big Stratford Shaw. They're getting paid, $50,000, $60,000 a year, maybe 70 if you're at a bigger, more established place. Sometimes it's 35 to 50 if it's, if it's a smaller theater, but it's guaranteed income. It's employment income. It looks better on a bank record in your credit because you're getting paid every week, and it's a long-term gig. You don't have to worry about next year's thing as long as you're a competent administrator.
I used to work in the touring business, right, in global touring. So, the main thing for that is you're gone. You don't have the roots.
Exactly.
And you can only do it for so long.
Oh, yeah.
And some people burn out. Some people, it becomes their life.
Yeah.
And it's not easy. And people glamorize it, of course, right?
I don't know. Doing like 60 dates in 70 days.
Well,
is
you're on a
just
bus,
dumb.
right?
And you're on a bus.
Yeah.
Your travel day is your day off. Well, you're on a bus for 10 hours, and then you get to the place, and you have some dinner, and you go to bed, and you got to get up at 6 o'clock to do the install the next day. Like, that's not a life.
I got to know Rush's accountant, Liam, and he's known them from the beginning, and he would fly on the plane with them.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So if you have a gig like that, then, it's not so bad. Right?
Yeah.
Like Paul McCartney flies home, or Madonna flies home every night, whatever, right? You can do that. Yeah. But not even close to a little bit of people out there are doing that. It's just the tiniest fraction. I just happen to work in that part of the business, so I know that part of it. But I also know people who work, in the comedy thing and in other small theater stuff, right? And just smaller acts that nobody's maybe even heard of, or they're indie, or they're just starting, and they got to go on tours too. And that's like, what did my drummer call it? A taxi tour.
Oh, yeah.
Where you put your stuff in a taxi from the airport and meets you at the gig.
Yeah, or a van or something. Even worse, if you're doing a school tour or something in a van going all over Ontario. These don't happen too much anymore, but...
so being an artist is hard, and it's rewarding, but not necessarily monetarily.
Once you get to your 30s, you're like, I should do something else. In fact, when I said that, I was talking to a director out in the East Coast that I was working in when I was 33, and I said, I'm going to do something else. I'm going to become a paramedic. And he said, how old are you? I said, I'm 33. He's like, yep, that's the year. That's the year people either decide I'm going to do this for the rest of my life and commit, or they go, get me the hell out of here. I got to do something else because there's a deficit. Like, for example, and we used to talk about this as well, like if we had gone to business school, 4 years out with an MBA, 4 years in, you're doing pretty good, right? You're making a good salary, right? Yeah. Unless something's gone wrong, but like, let's say we were assuming we're all successful because we're all successful artists. Yeah. We were working a lot. We were doing a lot of work. Like,
sounds like we were there.
Exactly. We were successful. So comparing ourselves to somebody who had an MBA or someone who was in engineering or in
that
tech,
level of success.
Yeah, they'd have a house. They have a car or two. They have a family, a couple kids. They have a pension. They have
they're getting promotions. They're probably getting raises, at least with inflation,
exactly.
Which you may or may not be getting depending on the rates. It's really it would get lower.
Yeah.
Oh man, and so I guess that's the lesson for freelancing in general is it sounded like it was more of a regulated, like rates were in the business that you were in. As opposed to like, I do this service and I can charge whatever I want because I have value. Yeah. You had comparison against other people, and you feel like you were limited in terms of how much you could charge.
Oh yeah. Well, we're basically limited by the grants.
Okay.
And now what's happening? Sure. In fact, in the last,
the money itself.
Yeah.
Wow. So what's happening in the last?
Well, now in the last, so there are people, and this is a huge problem in theater in Canada right now, especially with design, is that because we have no union. We have an association called the Associated Designers of Canada. Yeah. But it's not a closed shop. You don't have to belong to the association to work. And there's a standardized contract, and there are minimum fees that have been negotiated, but they're minimums. They're not like what everyone should be making. Okay. And what's happening now is people are getting hired at a same rate that they were 15, 20 years ago, like the same rate or less. No. Yeah, because we're the only part of the business that has not been able to come up with a standardized closed shop union contract. And so who are you going to cut? Well, you're not going to cut the administrator because that's a job you can point out and go, well, you work here 40 hours a week.
Yeah.
You've got set number of hours, and when you work that out, well, you should be paid like $40,000, $50,000 a year or more. But with this, for a contract that I can't really tally up a number of hours, and because no one else is there saying, no, we will not work for less than this, then you get paid 20 to 30% less. It certainly has not gone up.
And like you said, it's the funding that really dictates this. It's not like you're going to do shows in somebody's salon who has a mansion, right? Because then you could dictate whatever you want.
Yeah.
This is like the money comes for the production.
Yeah.
So you have to move on. And paramedic interested you?
Yeah, it was an interesting career, and I liked the science about it, and I liked the medicine portion of it. And I had friends that had been successful. I had friends in theater who had gone back and become paramedics. It seemed like a job I wanted to do. There was three things. One was interesting. Two, it was something I could do. It was something that paid well, like the payoff was going to be good, and it was only 2 years.
Okay. I
didn't have to go to school. I had friends that had been a lawyer. I'm like, oh, I should go be a lawyer. I could probably write the LSAT and get in. And I was like, well, 4 years of law school, what if I hate it?
And then articling and summer student articling, all the process before you actually get to do what you want.
Yeah, and then in the end, if I go, God, I hate this, then I'm 5 years and 6 years and like massively in debt. So I could go back to school for 2 years and get a high-paying job. What I consider a high-paying job, medics may not think that, but it's a high-paying job. Sure. Entrance, you're making $40 an hour at the beginning of your career, $38 an hour. Some places it's less, but it's around 35 to 37, I think, is the entrance, on average. And you get good benefits, and there's a pension, and it's guaranteed, and everyone needs medics. So it was a good job. And so that's what I thought I should do. And I went down to the U.S. and retrained and came back and got a job and done.
So you're now working as a paramedic.
Yeah.
Now, high stress, though.
Now, 10 years in, this is probably not true, but for the first 5 years of my career, I felt palpably that theater was more stressful than paramedicine.
Wow.
It's that, like, financial stress, first of all.
Yeah.
The constant judging that you get from your peers and the need to, like, completely perform all the time.
Wow. And
the stress of living a freelance life.
Sure.
Right? The uncertainty in theater and working as a freelancer is just like, is unbearable. You get used to it. You don't see it when you're in the job.
Sure.
Because you're like, I made my rent.
That's what you know.
Yeah. I made my rent next month. That's good enough. I'm a success.
But you tasted the paramedic life.
Yeah.
And you're like,
holy crap. Like, what was I doing?
So you're able to pay for everything you're living.
Yeah. So now you
already had in mind, I want to save for retirement, but you got to pay back your student loan.
So student loan got paid off in a few years. Okay. I actually I got a line of credit, and I got a loan from a good friend of mine as well to sort of pad out the rest of it.
Okay.
And that worked out, and I paid off the loan from my folks. Actually, it wasn't a loan from my folks. They had co-signed it, so they were like a bit anxious about me paying it off. So I had paid that off, no problem, and I paid the loan off from my friend, and then I got that in the first probably 5 years. And felt good, and then went back to school for more debt.
Okay, so wait, more paramedic school?
I got my undergrad.
Oh, I see.
So to advance, so I had gotten my paramedic diploma. It was a certification in the U.S. that then found equivalent up here. So it wasn't. It was equivalent to like an associate's degree, maybe. It was like not even. It was a vocational program down there. So it was a 1-year program that got seen as equivalent up here. And then...
Got your foot in the door.
I got my foot in the door. Got hired.
You got hired. You're making money. Pay down your debts.
But the next thing to do, like if I was going to move up to management or do anything else, I had to get my undergrad.
Okay.
So then I went back to school and got an undergrad at U of T.
So this is more debt. So how did you pay down the first debt? Like just frugality?
I was making enough money that I could pay that off every month.
That's fantastic.
And then live a pretty reasonable life, but more or less the same lifestyle I was living before.
Okay.
Now with more security, and saving a bit of money, and a little RSP, and I have a pension that I'm putting away every year that you have to put away.
Okay. Yeah.
Through OMERS.
So some forced savings. So it's OMERS. Which is a pretty good pension.
It's a good pension. Like I still have it.
Yeah.
Because I still work part-time. So that went really well. And I paid that off. And then I went into a bit of debt with, not official debt, just like I had a line of credit that was a personal line of credit that I basically paid for my undergrad.
So you need a 4-year bachelor degree?
Yeah. I did a 4-year degree at U of T. I did a little bit at Athabasca to sort of keep going to school, and got like a first-year science from them. I got some extra training from work, became an advanced care paramedic, and that was that was paid for by work. That was about a $200,000 investment they made in my career.
Wow,
at
really?
work. Yeah, because you're pulled off the road, getting full salary for about a year. They have to be backfilled by somebody else.
Really?
So they pay you, and they pay someone else to do your job, and then they pay for your schooling.
Now, how do you qualify for that?
It's a competitive application process at work.
I say audition.
Audition, yeah, basically, yeah, you have to do it. But I mean, there's
I'm in the theater mode.
Yeah,
here.
exactly. There's a written component. There's a practical component you have to do, and then you get picked by seniority after that.
So you really wanted this, and
Yeah.
you went out and you got it.
Yeah, and that took a little pause, and then after that, I had my first year of science at Athabasca. I had an equivalent of a well, it didn't really matter that much. I had my undergrad, my original theater training, which was basically an associate's degree at Ryerson, and did a couple high school things, and then got into U of T to do my undergrad part time there.
And what did you get?
I have a Bachelor of Science in human physiology and history and philosophy of science as a double major.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so now this probably is what they use for your med school application?
Yes. Thank God they didn't use Ryerson. Ryerson was a terrible... They made this mistake because I went to Ryerson before it was a university, so it was a college program. But now it's a university, and you have to put all of any mark you've ever gotten, you have to put in the OMSAS, the medical school application process. And they included my Ryerson marks in the initial GPA calculation.
Really?
Because it's a university now. So they thought, it's a university degree. But I went there before it was a university degree, so I had to call them and was like, guys,
okay,
you cannot use my Ryerson marks because I was a terrible student. And just a low GPA.
And we should note that it doesn't matter that it wasn't a health or science. They don't look at that. They look at GPA.
GPA. Call anything. It was a university credit that you took. They put that towards your.
And so if you know you're going to go to med school, you're probably going to try to build your GPA high by taking whatever you need to take that you can excel at.
Exactly.
But we don't all have that option.
Especially when marks were not the thing. When I was in theater, it was about your artistic practice. And so, there were several classes that I got like a D. I just passed.
Yeah, you just get through.
And it wasn't about
GPA. You get your diploma, you get your degree, and you walk out the door.
Exactly.
Nobody really talks like, you see it right there. I have a degree from Western, and nobody knows what marks I got.
No.
Doesn't matter. It never mattered in my 15 years working in corporations.
Yeah.
But for some things it does. So let's talk about the decision to go to med school. So you have you're an advanced care paramedic.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're pretty set up.
It's a great gig, dude.
Money-wise, I'm sure, too, now.
It's a good money.
So
it's good money.
Is it just OMERS you're focusing on? Or are you building emergency funds? Or what are you doing?
See, here's the thing. So I have no dependents, unmarried, unpartnered. So I was just me.
Yeah.
And, man, after working 10 years in theater as a freelancer and then finally having a job that you could rely on, that paid you well, that was taking care of a pension that I didn't have to think about.
You felt safe.
I felt safe. And I felt like I gave myself liberty to go into a little bit of debt for school.
Yeah.
And
that's great investment.
Yeah, and my debt at the end of my total debt at the end of the 10 years I was working as a paramedic was basically just how much it cost to go to school.
Yeah.
So I managed the rest of the debt.
Amazing.
And worried about it a little bit, had some credit card debt, carried some debt. But my total debt was like, what the cost of the degree was. And so, as will become important later, not a student line of credit, just a personal line of credit. But I did okay. I spent, I was having a fun life. I didn't buy any real estate because I wanted to live in downtown Toronto. That was a lifestyle choice.
Okay, yeah.
Early on, I thought, I should probably make some real estate investments. I'd gotten a financial advisor and started putting some money away.
Okay, you did.
In an RSP, like I had made a serious commitment to that.
Yeah.
To
just
put
mutual funds?
It was just mutual funds, yeah. With the idea that I should be putting more money away to do something with, probably an education fund, maybe first-time home buyers, something like that.
Okay.
I had in my distant past, I had bought a house with a partner that I had married in the late 90s. And
you skipped over that.
Yeah, that was a whole other it wasn't like it was a working artist. I wasn't. He paid for most of the house. He was a nurse. No fallout from that. We had sold the house. We got divorced or split up, and we'd sold the house, and it was not.
Well, it doesn't sound like you made any kind of money off of that.
We made like $10,000 or something off of it.
But that just.
But it was like
went. It
was a financial kind of byway or cul-de-sac. Like it just sort of.
It just
happened,
but it didn't affect
didn't
the rest of
affect.
your life.
No.
Yeah, that's an interesting situation where, a lot of people talk about, I used the money from this house to buy this house, and then the house after house after house, and now, and it all grew.
Not my gig.
No.
Yeah.
So now, though, you're in a position where you have investments, you got your OMERs,
Yeah.
you're not buying, which means you have more money to invest and save, and you feel safe.
Yeah.
But
I did well in undergrad.
Yeah.
And again, because I had nobody else, I'm only thinking of myself at this point because I have nobody else to take care of.
Yeah.
Which is an advantage and a privilege in some respects.
Yeah,
right?
interesting to think of it. We don't think of that as a privilege, but having options is a privilege. And we all try to compare ourselves to everybody else. You don't know what's going on with somebody. You don't know if they have sick parents to take care of.
Exactly.
You don't know if they have, you might know if they have a family. Hopefully they talk about their family.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's like, oh, why is he, how could he go back to school and do that? Yeah, it's because you didn't have kids, right? You decided not to buy real estate.
Exactly.
You're living, you're making decent money because you decided to go back to school.
Mm-hmm.
You took a lot of chances, not necessarily really risky chances, but you went into debt, which a lot of people are scared to do, scared to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And you made the decision to grow, took a chance on yourself. The first one with the paramedic paid off.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the theater one paid off. You just were not in a sustainable place because like you said, you were a success.
Yeah.
Which is really, I don't want to say sad, but it's sad, isn't it? Is that the right word?
Well, it's true. Like I'll give you an example. 4 years in, I had left Ryerson in 94, and I worked 95, 96, 97 before I got a more of a longer term gig. It was like several months at Shaw. It was an entry level position. I was an assistant. My take home pay for living expenses for like getting through the day was $79 a week. $79 a week.
$9 into savings.
Sure.
And
sure, $9 into savings.
$70 to buy food.
And have a beer every once in a while.
That it's just really unfortunate. So some might say you're fine as a paramedic.
Mm.
Why would you take another risk?
This was a purely living an interesting life decision.
Okay, yes. No longer financial. You were motivated financially before, but now you feel like it is that it's part of the Maslow's hierarchy.
Yeah.
You've got everything covered now.
Yeah.
You can think about, what do I really want to do?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what you're thinking now.
Yeah, and that's continued. And I made two decisions. One was, first of all, I never thought about going to med school prior to going to university. And, people had made jokes about it. Oh, when are you going to be a doctor? I'm like, yeah, like, I'm a paramedic. I did terribly in school. Like, look at my Ryerson marks. They're embarrassing.
Yeah.
And I discovered that I had an affinity for education when I went back to school, only as an adult.
Okay.
Only because I had the discipline of a 10-year career of theater and working independently and thinking.
Different time of life.
Yeah.
It's just, you're a different person, right?
Totally. And then, all you had to do was just do the work. Like, at that point, I'm smart enough that I had to do the work, and then I did well. And then undergrad, all I got to do is do the work.
It's that simple, right?
Be interested in what you're doing, and then just do the work. And come up with a system to study. That is a huge thing I failed at when I was 20.
Sure.
I was building an artistic practice, artisanal practice, but I wasn't building an academic practice. And now I had the luxury of being able and the time to think about that and actually do it. So I did well. And I got convinced by a friend of mine, Blair Bingham, who's now a fourth-year resident here in Hamilton in emergency medicine. And we worked together as paramedics.
Okay.
And he's like, so when are you applying to med school? And I thought, okay, I'll apply as a lark.
Really?
Like my marks are doing well. I have to write the MCAT. The only place I want to go is MAC. The only place I would go is MAC because it's a 3-year program. And that extra year means a lot to somebody who's 40-something.
Financially and also for time for you.
I get out a year early. That year of earnings is really important to me.
Interesting.
As a middle-aged man as opposed to 21-year-old. Like, man, extra year, who cares?
Well, yeah, the loony doctor who was on the podcast, he talked about the runway, that you have a shortened runway when you go to med school and then residency and all that until you get to the actual doctor money.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, and your runway is even shorter because you started later than most.
Yeah.
Not later than everybody, but some people are 20, as you know, in your class.
Yeah, I know. You can make a whole lot of mistakes, and it's not going to really make a difference in the long run, right? Me, I had to like be more prudent. But I become used to making those kind of risks, and without having any kind of dependence, it was easy. I want to say it's easy, but I have been exceedingly lucky. I left theater. I got into a program in the U.S. Every decision I made worked out. I left theater. I got a line of credit. Yeah, my folks had to co-sign it or like guarantee it, but they did. And I was lucky enough to have that they were able to. That the bank was like, no, we can, like they're fine to countersign that. So there's that luck there, or that privilege there. I applied to school. I got in the U.S., which is not that big a deal. Like to get into a paramedic program in the U.S. is not very difficult, which is why I went down there. I couldn't get into one in Ontario because it was too much competition.
Interesting.
And so, but then I came back and I got equivalency. And within the 2-year process, which is about how long it takes to become a paramedic in Ontario, I got hired at York Region EMS in Ontario. That job is a good paying job. Like there was no gap. There was no slogging of like, will I get hired at this place or that place? I just got hired.
What I'm seeing in your path, right, is you made like small moves to get to where you wanted to go.
Yes.
You took the lesson here is people are like, I can never do that because I'll never get in. Well, here, how about this route B that you can take and then come back to A?
Yeah.
But for med school, you went for MAC. 5,000 plus people applying.
Even 6,000 people is what I was told.
500 and something are picked from those.
Yeah.
And then how many from those?
And there's 200. So once you get an interview, the odds are pretty good. I just have to be better than one or two other people.
I mean, I want to agree with you because my wife got in, of course.
Yeah.
But also there's these forums that you've probably been on where a lot of people don't get in.
A lot of people
after
it takes 2 or 3 times.
4, and some people never, and it is crushing.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's crushing for them. This is a difficult process. So, I mean, do you feel lucky?
Exceedingly lucky because I applied once and then I got in.
That is very lucky.
Like, how
very
does
lucky.
that happen? Like, most people in my class, I had to do a couple rounds. Yeah, I got in. Like,
so that's amazing.
I don't know. Like, and every choice I've made, I only applied to like going back. I only applied to Ryerson to go to theater school. I got in there. I only applied to this place. Well, I applied to a couple places around paramedicine. I applied to a place in Ontario, and then I applied to this place in Iowa, and then I only applied at U of T, and I got into U of T, and then I applied at Mac, and I got into Mac. Like, I don't know how. Like I don't know how that happened, other than hard work, perseverance, and maybe some sort of inherent talent, I guess. I don't want to admit that because I don't see it, right?
Well, you're obviously talented to be able to get into medical school,
yeah, sure.
Right off the bat.
Sure.
Do you feel like you're thriving? You're in clerkship right now?
Yeah.
Which is the second part.
Yeah, it's the practical portion of the 3-year MD program.
And then when do you go into residency?
In a year from now, I'll be an MD. So that's and then I'll be going to residency after that.
How many years do you anticipate being a resident?
So I had originally wanted to go into a 5-year residency to become an emergentologist, which is an emergency medicine specialist. But after doing some emergency electives and working with other residents who make that choice, and it's a great program. Like you become an expert. It is quite an extraordinary, 5 years. But by the 5th year, you're memorizing a lot of stuff that you're never going to see, and you're going to start to forget in about 6 months.
Okay.
So while you may be at the peak of your knowledge, that curve will start to bend.
Okay.
And you start to lose a lot of that knowledge because there's stuff that you never see in that career. So my plan now is to go back and become a rural family program.
Fantastic.
2 years of that, and then +1 in Emerge. Which for me is now 2 years less than a 5-year program to do basically the same job of emergency medicine. It won't necessarily have the same kind of academic career, although you can still have an academic career as a rural family doc if you want. And so 3 years residency. So 3 years in my medicine program, 3 years as a resident, and I'll be a staff doctor making the average salary.
And people can probably do all the math for the years that you've been doing all of this, but how do you feel like looking at this? Do you feel like you're finally where you want to be? Like, this is about taking chances on yourself, which for you have paid off. It's about being like careful with your money, not getting into too much debt, but also taking on a reasonable amount of debt to move yourself forward, which again, people are scared of. It's about taking chances on yourself.
I agree. Like, they have never felt risky to me because I've only because I lived as a freelancer for 10 years, and that's about as much risk as you can
started
have.
in the right place.
Yeah, exactly. I made a commitment when I was going to do this. I thought, if I'm going to go back to med school, I'm not going to live as a student again, because I did that quite leanly when I was if that's the word, as a theater school student. And I don't want to go back there. And I don't want to, eat Kraft Dinner and Mr. Noodles and try to scrimp and save and try to get as little debt. And that might be the prudent thing to do, because then, the less debt you have, because medical school is quite expensive, and you can get, and, when you're not working full time, you can run up quite a huge amount of debt.
That's right.
In just a few years living as my paramedic, affluent self.
That's right.
But I also thought, I'm going to get through med school. I'm going to get through residency. I'm going to choose a job where I'm making, plenty of six figures of money. Like the average physician salary is $360,000 or something in Canada, which is an obscene amount of money from my past life, right?
Yes.
Even if you pay full taxes on that, I'm still taking home $150,000 or $170,000.
Yeah.
The hell does somebody do with $170,000?
You put it away and then you retire whenever you want.
Yeah, exactly.
You get your financial independence, which is what you should already have if you would have been in a different business.
Mm-hmm.
Being as frugal and successful as you have been, it's taking chances on yourself and not being afraid to pivot.
Mm-hmm.
Because what happens is people are in their thing for 10 years and they're like, I do not know where to go. And there are plenty of podcasts out there just about that topic.
Yeah.
What if I'm sitting in a cubicle hating my life?
Right.
And you didn't stay in the quote unquote cubicle.
I was never in the cubicle.
You were actually literally never in the cubicle.
Yeah.
But you didn't stay trapped in your no future, no retirement possibility zone.
Yeah. I would never put up with that. This pivotal period of the 33 making a decision to leave theater.
Yeah.
There's an inertia that happens once you get into your late 30s and early 40s, and now you're in this career, and now you're like, well, do I go back to school for 4 years? Do I upend my life? Now you maybe have kids and a spouse and all those things where you go, well, now the risks are higher if I go, what if I hate this?
That's right.
And I have friends who still work in theater. All it takes is a Ford to be in charge of the federal government and cut the guts out of the Canada Council. All of my friends will be unemployed. I don't know what they would do. That kind of uncertainty hangs over the heads of artists all over the world, let alone Canada, where we have at least the Canada Council. We're no Germany or UK where they have a wonderful arts program nationally. But even in the US, it's better than here, believe it or not.
Really?
Yeah. I could be wrong about that, but I believe they have not as many cuts as the Canada Council, and we're better funded to begin with. And they have a better philanthropic establishment in the US where it's important to give lots of money to the arts. Up here, there's where I have a younger population of millionaires here who don't see the payback of that kind of giving. And
it's not a direct payback. That's the thing. And so I guess the conclusion is support the arts.
Please
support the arts. Not everyone's, I guess we will call you lucky because you're
I'm lucky.
I mean, you are lucky in a way, but you also worked very, very hard.
Sure.
We need to acknowledge that as well. And we need to acknowledge that you made choices that a lot of people are afraid of, and so you don't have that fear. And that's I like that. That's a good theme. It's sometimes you just got to take a chance. You got to you can't just stay. Would you want to be miserable just staying, right?
Mm-hmm.
We got to mention your podcast.
Yeah, so that's thank you. So one of the things that I loved about theater, and the thing that obviously I miss, is the community.
Mm-hmm.
It's a shorter history of theater in Canada. Really, modern Canadian theater really started in the late 60s. It goes back into the 20s, but in the late 60s, they came with the Canada Council in 1967. There was a whole bunch of grants that were instituted, and we built a modern Canadian storytelling apparatus of theater that was supposed to be different than the British tradition and our American colleagues to the south. And we started telling Canadian stories. The great thing about theater is this community that we've built, because it's not huge, and the community is small enough that a lot of people, and a lot of people know each other very well here. You can't really sit in obscurity in Canadian theater if you're working full-time in it, because you get to know a lot of people from across the country. And I miss that. the second part of that is that there's nobody really collecting the history of theater in Canada.
Okay.
There are obviously academics who are doing it, people with academic careers who are collecting that theater history, but theater design specifically has been left out.
Yeah.
Most of the history that's being collected is about the artists on the stage.
Of course.
Right? And theater design has a long history, from the late 60s when we started getting more money and building professional theater. Design became an important part of that expression. And so I decided that I was going to try to capture some of that theater history. And my original thought was we have this awards in Toronto called the Herald Awards, which are like alternative theater awards. And they're structured in a way that they have sort of an arc, a historical arc, where one person gives it to a second person, who gives it to the third person, and they're all interrelated. And I thought, well, isn't that an interesting story to tell about Canadian independent theater in Toronto? That was a huge network of people. There's a couple hundred people who have now gotten that award, and it was difficult to get off the ground. But what I could do was talk to my friends about their own careers.
Yeah.
And so I started in 2014. I started a podcast called The Title Block Podcast, which is a niche podcast. If you're in amateur theater or professional theater, you will appreciate it. If you're not, it's a lot of inside baseball.
Okay.
But we talk about theater design, about their. I talk to theater designers about their own personal, their professional histories, and how they've interacted with Canadian theater in a historical context, and they've been around since the early 50s. Then. Which some of them have. It's a rich history of Canadian theater that they hold inside themselves. And so we draw those stories out, and then we talk about the craft of theater design in Canada as well.
Nice. And you've done maybe over 50 episodes?
I think we're in the mid-50s. The number got a bit off because there's a bunch of special events, but I've interviewed probably about 40 to 50 designers at this point. I have about 10 designers in the can right now ready to go out, from the senior level artists to like the first 10 years kind of career artists as well. And we talk about theater and design and how they think and how their process, and then how their lives have intersected with Canadian theater history.
That's awesome. And that's what podcasting is about, right?
Yeah.
You can add that voice that is not, the niche is not there, right? In the podcasting world, and I want to talk about that. Yeah. And it's fantastic. So if you have any interest in theater, probably at all, check it out.
Yeah,
it's called The Title Block.
Yeah, go to thetitleblock.com is the website. We're on Apple, iTunes, and Play.
All the places where you can find this podcast. You can find
exactly,
and we're both on Patreon as well.
Yes,
so there you go. You can check us out.
I have a meager Patreon.
Give us $1 an episode or
That'd
something.
Be great. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for coming to the studio. Thanks for coming on the show and telling your story.
This was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
And that was episode 80 with Michael Kruse. If this was your first time tuning in, you should check out my 75th episode, where I have 1-minute segments for each of the 74 episodes that came before it. It's a quick way to find an episode that you might be interested in without listening to hours and hours of the show. If you're a regular listener, thanks so much for downloading the episodes every week. Another way that you can support the podcast is by going to my Patreon site and becoming a patron. The link is at the end of the show notes in most podcast apps. Otherwise, just head to patreon.com/BoHumphreys. It's Patreon. I also have a Facebook group for the podcast. Head over to Facebook and search for The Personal Finance Show to join that group. That's it for this episode. I'll be back next week with finance writer, speaker, and tax specialist Janine Rogan.